My brother threw my son's birthday present against the wall, laughing while he cried in front of everyone. My family said, "Oh, come on, it's just a joke." My father stood up, took off his heavy gold ring, and slammed it down on the glass coffee table. The room went dead silent. What he said next shattered our entire family. Before I tell you how a simple piece of broken wood led to the complete collapse of my toxic family and a massive promotion I never saw coming, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Alright, let us get into it. The smell of expensive cologne and burnt rubber still makes my stomach turn. It was a bright Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that was supposed to be perfect for a 7-year-old boy. We were at my parents' massive, sterile house in the suburbs. My mother, Martha, insisted on hosting my son Isaac's birthday party there because she wanted to control the guest list and the aesthetics. She hated the small apartment I rented. Isaac was standing by the pristine marble kitchen island. His eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered joy. In his small hands, he held the wooden castle I had spent the last 2 months carving for him. Every single turret, every tiny drawbridge chain, I had sanded smooth by hand in my freezing garage after he went to sleep. It was made of solid oak and birch. It was a piece of my heart. Then the front door swung open. The roaring engine of a brand new Porsche cut out in the driveway. Carter had arrived. My older brother, Carter, the golden child. He was 37, a senior executive at my father's marketing firm, and he wore his arrogance like a tailored suit. He strolled into the kitchen, a smirk permanently glued to his face. He did not say hello to me. He barely looked at the other kids. He walked straight over to Isaac. "What is this piece of junk?" Carter asked. His voice was loud, cutting through the chatter of the room. "My dad made it for me," Isaac said softly, clutching the wooden castle a little tighter to his chest. "It is a fortress." Carter laughed. It was a sharp, mocking sound. "Still playing with blocks, Matthew?" he said, shooting a sideways glance at me. "I thought you would have bought him a real toy, with the salary dad pays you to push papers." I felt the heat rise in my neck. "Leave him alone, Carter. It is his birthday." Carter ignored me. He reached out and yanked the castle out of Isaac's hands. Isaac let out a small gasp. Carter examined it, tossing it carelessly from one hand to the other. "Looks pretty flimsy," he said. "Give it back." I stepped forward, my voice dropping low. "Relax. I am just testing the structural integrity," Carter sneered. He held the castle up high, looked right into my eyes, and then he let go. But he did not just drop it. He threw it. He pitched it hard against the stone backsplash of the kitchen. The sound of the oak shattering echoed like a gunshot. Wood splintered and rained down onto the marble floor. The main tower snapped clean off. The working drawbridge I had spent a week assembling was crushed. Isaac screamed. It was a high, terrified sound that broke my heart in half. He fell to his knees, his little hands hovering over the broken pieces, too afraid to touch the sharp splinters. Tears streamed down his red cheeks. Carter let out a booming laugh. "Whoops, clumsy me. Guess the fortress wasn't that strong after all." I lunged forward. I grabbed Carter by the collar of his expensive shirt, shoving him hard against the counter. "What is wrong with you?" I roared. Suddenly, a heavy hand grabbed my shoulder and yanked me back. It was my father, David. "Matthew, stop this right now," my father barked. My mother rushed over, not to comfort her crying grandson, but to smooth Carter's collar. "Oh, come on, Matthew," she sighed, waving her hand dismissively. "It is just a joke. Lighten up." Carter did not mean it. I stared at them, my chest heaving. A joke? Look at my son. He destroyed his present on purpose. That was when my father stood up straight. He looked at me with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. He slowly pulled his heavy gold signet ring off his finger and slammed it down on the glass coffee table in the living room. The sharp crack made everyone flinch. The room went as quiet as a funeral. "Your brother made a mistake," my father said, his voice dripping with absolute authority. But you are making a scene in my house over a worthless piece of scrap wood. You have always been overly sensitive, Matthew. If you want to survive in the real world, you need to toughen up. And so does the boy. He did not look at Isaac. He looked right through him. I looked at my brother, who was smirking behind my father's back. I looked at my mother, who was already pouring another glass of wine. And then I looked down at Isaac, who was sobbing quietly, holding a broken piece of a wooden turret. In that exact second, the blindfold I had been wearing my entire life fell off. I realized I could not save them. I could only save my son. "Come here, buddy," I whispered. I knelt down and picked Isaac up. He barely to understand why walking out of that house felt like jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. You have to understand the grip my father had on our lives. My father built his marketing firm from the ground up. He believed in money, power, and optics. He did not believe in art, feelings, or second chances. Carter was exactly what my father wanted. Ruthless, sharp, and entirely focused on the bottom line. I was the disappointment. I liked working with my hands. I liked the smell of sawdust and the feeling of shaping something out of nothing. But in my family, if it did not make a six-figure return in the first quarter, it was considered a failure. 3 years before that terrible birthday party, I went through a divorce. It was a painful time, but Sarah and I managed to keep things respectful. We agreed on shared custody, and she was a good mother. But the divorce destroyed my finances. To pay for the lawyers and to ensure I had a decent place for Isaac when he was with me, I had to swallow my pride and crawl to my father for a job. He gave me a low-level desk job at his firm. It was essentially data entry. The salary was barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but it kept a roof over our heads. However, the real cost was my dignity. Every day, I had to watch Carter get praised, promoted, and handed massive bonuses, while my father used my paycheck as a leash to control me. My mother, Martha, was the enabler. She loved the country club, the luncheons, and the perfect family image. Whenever Carter bullied me, she would say, "He is just being a big brother." Whenever my father belittled me, she would say, "He just wants you to reach your potential." She wrapped their toxicity in a bow and called it love. Woodworking was my only escape. I had a tiny, unheated garage at my rental house. After Isaac went to bed, I would go out there, put on a thick coat, and carve. I made little animals, puzzle boxes, and eventually that ill-fated castle. It was the only time I felt like I was actually breathing. But on that Saturday, driving away from my parents' mansion with Isaac crying in the back seat, I knew the game was over. I had played their game, accepted their abuse, and swallowed their insults because I thought I needed their money to survive. I thought I was protecting Isaac by maintaining a relationship with his grandparents. I was wrong. I was just exposing him to the same poison that had infected me. I drove us to a quiet park. We sat on a bench near the duck pond. I held Isaac until his breathing slowed down. "Dad," he sniffled, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Why does Uncle Carter hate me?" The question hit me like a physical punch. I pulled him tight against my chest. "He does not hate you, Isaac. Uncle Carter is just a very unhappy person inside. Sometimes unhappy people try to make other people feel bad so they can feel big. But it has nothing to do with you. You are amazing." "He broke the fortress," Isaac whispered, looking down at his lap. "I know," I said. "But we are builders, right? We can build a new one, a better one." I took him out for ice cream, trying to salvage the rest of his birthday. But my mind was racing. By walking out, I had basically quit my job. I had zero savings. I had a week before rent was due. That night, after Isaac was fast asleep in his bed, I made a decision. I could not just walk away and leave things hanging. I needed to cut the cord completely. I left a trusted neighbor a text to keep an ear out for Isaac, got in my beat-up car, and drove back to my parents' house. It was close to midnight. The lights were still on in the living room. I used my old key to unlock the front door. I walked in and found my father sitting in his leather armchair, pouring a glass of scotch. My mother was on the sofa, scrolling through her tablet. Carter was gone. They looked up, surprised to see me. My father's lips curled into a victorious smile. "I knew you would be back," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "You always come crawling back when reality sets in. Did you come to apologize?" I walked over to the coffee table. The broken pieces of Isaac's castle had already been swept away by the maid, as if the cruelty had never happened. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the security badge for the office and the keys to the company car they let me use occasionally. I dropped them onto the glass table. They landed with a sharp clatter. "I did not come to apologize," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. "I came to resign." My mother sat up straight, dropping her tablet. "Matthew, do not be dramatic. It is late. You are emotional." "I am completely rational," I replied, looking directly at my father. "I am done. I will not let you or Carter treat my son the way you treated me. I will not let him grow up thinking that money gives you the right to be cruel." My father's face hardened. The smugness vanished, replaced by a dark, simmering anger. "You have no money, Matthew. You have a child to feed. If you walk out that door, I will cut you out of the will. You will get 0 inheritance. You will be dead to this family." "I have been dead to this family for years," I said. "Keep the inheritance. Keep the job. Keep the Porsche and the country club. I do not want a single dime of your money. It is toxic." "You are going to fail," my father spat, leaning forward. "You will be out on the street within a month, and when you come begging for help, the door will be locked." "I would rather sleep under a bridge than let my son spend another minute in this house," I said. I turned around and walked toward the door. "Matthew," my mother cried out, "think about what you are doing." I did not stop. I walked out into the cool night air, got into my car, and drove away. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel, but for the first time in my 32 years of life, my chest felt light. I was terrified, but I was free. The next morning, reality hit me like a freight train. I had to move. My current rental was too expensive without my salary. I scoured the classifieds and found a tiny, run-down 2-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town. It was situated directly above a noisy, 24-hour laundromat. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, was a grumpy old man who demanded 2 months' rent up front. I sold my television, my watch, and a few good suits I had left over from my corporate days just to get the cash. The apartment smelled like bleach and cheap dryer sheets. The floorboards creaked, and the rumble of the industrial washing machines downstairs made the walls vibrate constantly. When I brought Isaac to see it, my heart sank. I expected him to cry or complain. Instead, he dropped his backpack, ran into the empty living room, and spun around. "It vibrates," he laughed. "It is like a spaceship, Dad." I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled. "Yeah, buddy, it is our spaceship." The next few months were the hardest of my life. I had to pay for food, utilities, and keep up with the custody agreement requirements. I took whatever jobs I could find. I delivered pizzas late into the night. I worked early morning shifts loading trucks at a warehouse. I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. My body ached constantly. My hands were covered in blisters and cuts from hauling heavy boxes. There were nights when I sat in my car outside the pizza place, smelling like stale grease, staring at the steering wheel, and listening to my father's voice echoing in my head. "You are going to fail. You will be out on the street." The temptation to pick up the phone and beg for my job back was a living, breathing thing. It would be so easy to surrender. But then I would go home, walk into the tiny bedroom, and see Isaac sleeping peacefully. I could not go back. I would not subject him to that poison again. But I noticed changes in Isaac. He was quieter. If I dropped a pan in the kitchen, he would flinch, his shoulders jumping up to his ears. The sound of sudden, loud noises terrified him now. Carter's violent outburst had left a mark on my little boy's nervous system. It made me so angry I could hardly see straight. I realized that just surviving was not enough. I needed to show Isaac how to fight back, not with violence, but with success. I needed to build a life where no one could ever make us feel small again. One Sunday afternoon, while I was off from my jobs, I found Isaac sitting at our wobbly kitchen table. He had a bottle of wood glue and the broken pieces of the dragon that used to sit on top of the ruined castle. He was painstakingly trying to fit the splintered wood back together. His brow was furrowed in intense concentration. I sat down next to him. "Do you want some help with that?" I asked gently. He looked up, his eyes bright. "I think I can fix his wing, Dad." "See?" I looked at the messy, glued joint. It was crooked, but it held together. "You did a great job," I said. I went to my closet and pulled out the heavy plastic bin containing my carving tools. I had not touched them since the day we moved. I brought them to the table and laid them out. The cool steel of the chisels felt familiar and right in my hands. "Let's make him a new home," I said. We spent the rest of the day carving scraps of wood I had found near a construction site. I did not have my garage anymore, so we worked right there on the kitchen table, sweeping sawdust off the cheap linoleum floor. As I watched the wood take shape under my knife, a fire ignited in my gut. My father and brother thought my passion was a joke. They thought creating things with your hands was beneath them. I was going to prove them wrong. I was going to build an empire out of the very wood they had smashed. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning. I was walking home from a grueling night shift loading trucks, taking a shortcut through an industrial alley, when it started to pour rain. I ducked under the awning of an old brick building to stay dry. Through the dusty window, I saw it. It was a massive, fully equipped woodworking shop. Huge table saws, heavy-duty planers, and walls lined with clamps and hand tools. The air filtering out of the vents smelled of fresh-cut cedar and linseed oil. It was intoxicating. I pushed the heavy wooden door open. The shop was empty except for an older man sitting on a stool in the back, carefully sanding a massive dining table. He had a thick white beard, faded denim overalls, and arms that looked like knotted tree trunks. He stopped sanding and looked up. "Shop is closed, kid," he grunted. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a cement mixer. "I am sorry," I said, dripping water onto his concrete floor. "I was just trying to get out of the rain. This is a beautiful shop." He eyed me suspiciously, taking in my soaked, cheap clothes and the dark bags under my eyes. He walked over, holding a rag. "You look like you need a hot meal, not a custom table. What do you do?" "I load trucks," I said, "and I deliver pizzas." He snorted. "Tough way to make a living." He held out the rag for me to dry my face. As I reached for it, he stopped and grabbed my wrist. He turned my hand over, staring at my palm. My hands were a mess. They were covered in thick, yellow calluses from the warehouse boxes, fresh burns from the pizza oven, and tiny, deep scars from years of slipping chisels. The old man's eyes narrowed. He traced a specific scar on my thumb. "You do not get a cut like that from a cardboard box," he said quietly. "That is from a gouge chisel. A sharp one." I pulled my hand back slowly. "I do some carving in my free time." He looked me dead in the eye. "These are not the hands of a hobbyist. These are the hands of a maker. Why are you wasting them loading boxes?" I did not know this man, but something about his blunt honesty broke down my walls. I told him everything. I told him about my family, the smashed castle, the custody bills, and my determination to build a safe life for my son. I stood in his shop, soaking wet, pouring my heart out to a stranger. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he tossed the rag at my chest. "My name is Elijah," he said. "I am getting too old to haul lumber by myself. You come here at 6 a.m. tomorrow. You sweep the floors, you clean the machines, and you move the wood. I will pay you cash. And when the paying work is done, you can use the corner bench and the scrap pile for whatever you want to build." I was stunned. I do not know what to say. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Elijah grumbled, turning back to his table. "I am a miserable boss." Elijah saved my life. Working for him was hard, physical labor, but it was a masterclass in craftsmanship. He taught me techniques I had never even dreamed of. He showed me how to read the grain of a board, how to respect the wood, and how to build joints that would last a century without a single metal nail. In the evenings, after the heavy lifting was done, I stood at my designated bench and poured my soul into my work. I started making highly detailed, articulated wooden toys. I made galloping horses with moving legs, intricate puzzle boxes that required secret sequences to open, and beautifully carved mechanical dragons. I took photos of my work using my cheap smartphone, holding them up against a white sheet near the window for natural light. I created an online store and called it Isaac's Landing, a safe place for things to land. The first week, nothing happened. The second week, I got a notification on my phone. Someone in California had bought a puzzle box. I stared at the screen, tears welling up in my eyes. It was $50. It was not a fortune, but it was money I had made with my own two hands, from my own mind. It was pure. Slowly, the orders started trickling in. $50 turned into $500. $500 turned into $1,000. I took every extra penny and opened a college fund account for Isaac. The feeling of depositing that first $100 into an account with his name on it was better than any promotion my father had ever dangled in front of me. But just as things were looking up, the storm clouds gathered again. I had spent a month designing a complex, multi-level wooden treehouse. It was going to be my masterpiece. It featured a hidden winding staircase, tiny functional windows, and a working pulley elevator. I planned to debut it at the upcoming State Artisan Fair, a highly competitive event that drew buyers from all over the country. One evening, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. "Hey man, it is Dylan. Long time no see. Heard you are back in town." Dylan and I had been best friends since kindergarten. We played on the same baseball teams, went to the same high school, and he even stood as a groomsman at my wedding. We had drifted apart over the last few years as he got heavily involved in the local gambling scene and my father demanded more of my time. I was thrilled to hear from him. We met up for a beer at a cheap diner. Dylan looked a bit rough around the edges, nervous, constantly checking his phone, but he was overly enthusiastic about my new life. "Man, I am so proud of you," Dylan said, taking a long swig of his beer. "Walking away from your dad's money takes guts. Tell me about this woodworking thing. You making any real cash?" I was so desperate for a friend, for someone from my past who did not judge me, that I spilled my guts. I told him about the online store, the upcoming artisan fair, and my big project. "A mechanical treehouse?" Dylan leaned in, his eyes wide. "That sounds crazy. How does the elevator mechanism even work?" I foolishly pulled out my phone and showed him my digital sketches and progress photos. He asked highly specific questions about the joints, the wood types, and the exact dimensions. I thought he was just being supportive. I answered every question. A week later, my stomach dropped into my shoes. I was checking my online competitors to see current pricing trends. I clicked on a website owned by a guy named Julian. Julian was notorious in the online crafting community. He did not make anything himself. He stole ideas, mass-produced them overseas using cheap plastic and toxic paint, and undercut the original creators. Right there on the front page of Julian's site was a new arrival. It was a plastic, garish, brightly colored treehouse. It had a winding staircase. It had tiny windows. It had a working pulley elevator. It was an exact, soulless replica of my design. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. How was this possible? I had only shown the sketches to Elijah and Dylan. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. A treehouse is a common idea, right? But the placement of the elevator, the exact curve of the stairs, it was too precise. The confirmation came the next day, wrapped in a cruel twist of digital fate. I received an email from an automated invoicing system. The subject line read, "Overdue payment notice, Julian Imports." I opened it, confused. I had never bought anything from Julian. But when I looked at the attached PDF, I realized the email had not been meant for me. Julian's automated system had mistakenly CC'd my email address from a previous customer service complaint I had filed months ago. The invoice was addressed to Dylan. The description of services read, consulting fee for treehouse design specs and reference photos. The room started spinning. The betrayal hit me harder than my brother's physical violence. Dylan, my oldest friend, the guy who used to share his lunch with me in second grade, had sold my ideas to a plagiarist for a quick payday to cover his gambling debts. He had sat across from me, drank my beer, smiled in my face, and stolen my future. For about 10 minutes, I wanted to smash everything in my apartment. I wanted to drive to Dylan's house and break his jaw. I wanted to scream, but then I looked over at the kitchen table. Isaac was sitting there, doing his homework, humming a quiet song to himself. He looked so peaceful, so safe. If I flew off the handle, if I got arrested for assaulting Dylan, I would lose everything. I would lose Isaac. I took a deep, shuddering breath and forced the rage down into a tight, hard ball in my chest. I was not the victim anymore. I was not the guy who stood there and let his family break his things. I was not going to let Dylan break my business. I did not call Dylan. I did not confront him. I texted him later that night, acting completely normal. I told him I had run into a structural problem with the treehouse design and sent him a new, updated sketch. I told him I had decided to use a much cheaper, unstable joint for the main weight-bearing pillar to save time. It was a fatal design flaw that would cause the whole thing to collapse under minimal pressure. I knew he would immediately pass it on to Julian to finalize their plastic molds. Then I went back to Elijah's shop. I scrapped the old design entirely. I spent the next 3 weeks working like a man possessed. I upgraded the wood to solid, heavy walnut. I redesigned the elevator mechanism using hidden brass gears I salvaged from broken clocks. I made the treehouse so complex, so structurally brilliant, and so undeniably beautiful that a plastic copy would look like an insult next to it. I set the trap. All I had to do now was wait for the fair. The State Artisan Fair was held in a massive, brightly lit convention center. The air buzzed with the chatter of thousands of attendees and the smell of roasted nuts and expensive coffee. Getting a booth here was a milestone for any craftsman. It was the place where major buyers came to find the next big thing. Elijah had helped me load my pieces into a rented van before dawn. He slapped me on the shoulder, his rough hand heavy and reassuring. "Let the wood do the talking, kid," he said. I set up my booth near the center aisle. I laid out a dark velvet cloth and carefully arranged my puzzle boxes, mechanical dragons, and carved animals. But the centerpiece, sitting on a sturdy oak pedestal under a warm spotlight, was the walnut treehouse. It was breathtaking. The rich, dark grain of the walnut shimmered. The hidden brass gears caught the light perfectly. It did not look like a toy. It looked like an heirloom. 2 aisles over, in a much larger, flashier booth, was Julian. He had banners, loud music, and stacks of brightly colored boxes. And right in the front of his display, under harsh fluorescent lights, sat the plastic knockoff of my original design. It looked cheap, hollow, and utterly devoid of soul. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Dylan. "Good luck today, bro. Hope you sell out." I stared at the screen, a cold smile touching my lips. I typed back, "Thanks, man. I have a feeling today is going to be unforgettable." I hit send and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I was ready. By 10 a.m., the doors opened, and the crowd flooded in. At first, Julian's booth drew a massive crowd. People were attracted to the loud colors and the cheap price tags. I watched from a distance as kids grabbed the plastic treehouses, yanking on the cheap string elevators. Then, exactly as I had planned, the floor revealed itself. A heavy-set kid leaned his weight on the main pillar of the plastic display model. Because Julian had rushed production using the fake, faulty specs I fed Dylan, the structural integrity was non-existent. With a loud, embarrassing crack, the plastic pillar snapped. The entire top heavy section of the treehouse collapsed, sending cheap plastic furniture flying across the aisle. The crowd gasped. Parents quickly pulled their kids away from the broken shards of plastic. Julian rushed forward, his face flushed red, desperately trying to snap the broken pieces back together, but it was useless. The illusion of quality was shattered. Slowly, the crowd began to drift away from his booth and move down the aisle toward mine. When they saw the real thing, the atmosphere changed. There was no loud music at my booth, just the quiet awe of people recognizing true art. Kids stared at the brass gears turning smoothly. Parents ran their hands over the polished walnut, marveling at the seamless joints. Around noon, the crowd parted slightly to make way for an older man in a sharp, tailored charcoal suit. He walked with an air of quiet authority. He did not look at the price tags. He did not pick up the items carelessly. He stood in front of the walnut treehouse, crossed his arms, and just stared. He stayed there for 10 full minutes in complete silence. He observed the grain matching on the winding stairs. He leaned in to inspect the hidden dovetail joints on the base. Finally, he looked up and met my eyes. "You built this?" he asked. His voice was smooth, refined. "I did," I replied, standing up straight. "There is not a single metal screw in the main frame," he observed. "You used traditional mortise and tenon joints, locked with wooden pegs. That takes a massive amount of time. Most people today just use a nail gun and cover it with putty." "Most people build things to be thrown away," I said, my voice steady. "I build things to be kept." The man smiled. It was a genuine, respectful smile. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and handed me a thick, embossed business card. The gold lettering read, "Christian Vance, CEO, Oak Haven Toy Collective." My heart hammered against my ribs. Oak Haven was not just a company. It was an institution. They were the premier distributors of high-end, educational, and artisanal wooden toys in the country. A contract with Oak Haven was the holy grail. It meant nationwide distribution, massive funding, and instant legitimacy. "I have been tracking the online buzz about Isaac's landing for a few weeks," Christian said, his eyes scanning the rest of my booth. "Your work is exceptional. It has a soul. I saw the plastic garbage being peddled 2 aisles over. It is a tragedy what people try to pass off as craftsmanship." "It is a tough market," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "It is," Christian agreed, "which is why Oak Haven is launching a new, exclusive line of prestige artisan products. We want to find a partner who understands heritage. Someone who builds with integrity." He paused, looking back at the walnut treehouse. "I want to buy this display piece right now for our corporate lobby. And I want to schedule a formal meeting with you next Friday at your workshop. I am prepared to offer you an exclusive, multi-year distribution contract." I felt the blood rush to my ears. An exclusive contract with Oak Haven. It meant a real, massive salary. It meant Isaac's college fund would be completely secured. It meant I had won. "I would be honored, Mr. Vance," I said, shaking his outstretched hand. "Please call me Christian," he said. He pulled out a sleek pen and began writing a check for the treehouse. As he wrote, he shook his head with a slight chuckle. "You know, it is funny how the universe works. We have been looking for the right partner for months. Just yesterday, I had to formally reject a massive proposal from a very aggressive marketing firm trying to license some mass-produced designs to us. They had a slick presentation, but the products lacked exactly what you have here. Authenticity." I froze. A cold prickle ran down my spine. "A marketing firm?" "Yes," Christian said, handing me the check. "Local guys. Big egos. A firm run by a man named David and his son Carter. You might know them, they operate in this city." The breath rushed out of my lungs. My father, my brother, they had been trying to land the Oak Haven account. It was probably the biggest deal of their fiscal year. And Christian Vance had just rejected them for lacking authenticity. "I am familiar with them," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Christian smiled, oblivious to the nuclear bomb he had just casually dropped into my life. "Well, their loss is our gain. I look forward to seeing your shop next Friday, Matthew. Have a great afternoon." As Christian walked away, I looked down at the check in my hand. The zeros blurred together. The universe wasn't just working. It was orchestrating a symphony of karma. My father and brother had tried to crush me. They had told me I was worthless, that I would fail without their money, without their name. And now I was holding the exact prize they had been desperately chasing. But I knew my father. The moment he found out who Oak Haven had chosen instead of him, he would not just sit back. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here, and it was heading straight for my workshop. The news of Christian Vance's interest in my work did not stay quiet for long. In the tight-knit world of high-end craftsmanship, word spreads like a wildfire in dry brush. It only took 48 hours for the smoke to reach the manicured lawns of my parents' country club. It started with an email. The notification popped up on my phone while I was sweeping the shop floor. The sender name made my chest tighten. Martha, my mother. I opened it expecting a critique or a demand. Instead, the screen was filled with dripping, artificial sweetness. Dearest Matthew, your father and I are just so incredibly proud of you. We heard the wonderful news about the artisan fair. We always knew you had a special gift, even when you were struggling. Family is everything, and we think it is time to put the past behind us. We would love to come down to your new workshop this Friday to celebrate your success and talk about your future. Love, Mom. I read the words 3 times. We always knew you had a special gift. The hypocrisy was so thick I could hardly breathe. For years, my passion was a joke. It was the reason I was the outcast. Now that there was money attached to my name, suddenly I had a gift. Before I could hit delete, my phone rang. It was my Uncle Jonathan. He was my father's younger brother, the only person in that family who had ever shown me a shred of genuine kindness, though he usually kept his head down to avoid my father's wrath. Matthew, Jonathan said, his voice hushed and urgent. Listen to me carefully. Do not sign anything your father gives you. I stopped sweeping. What are you talking about, Uncle Jonathan? I was at the house last night for dinner, he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. Your father's firm took a massive hit this quarter. They lost a major pitch. He is desperate. When he heard that Oak Haven was looking at your company, his eyes lit up. He thinks you just got lucky. He thinks you are still that naive kid who needs his approval. I gripped the broom handle tighter. So they want to come down here and play the proud parents? They want to take it from you, Matthew, Jonathan warned. David is bringing legal paperwork. He wants to absorb Isaac's landing into his corporate umbrella under the guise of protecting you. He wants to own your brand to save his own sinking ship. He thinks he can bully you into it like he always does. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. They were not coming to apologize. They were coming to steal the only thing I had ever built for myself. Let them come, I said quietly. Matthew, be careful. He is bringing his best corporate lawyer, Jonathan pleaded. I am not afraid of him anymore, Uncle Jonathan. Thank you for telling me. I hung up the phone. A strange, eerie calm washed over me. I texted my mother back immediately. Friday at 1 p.m. works perfectly. See you then. Christian Vance was scheduled to arrive at 1:30 p.m. I was going to let the wolves walk right into the trap. Friday afternoon arrived with heavy, gray clouds. The air in my shop was thick with the rich scent of cedar and the sharp tang of wood stain. Elijah and my small crew were out for lunch. I was alone when the roaring engine of Carter's shiny silver Porsche echoed through the industrial alleyway. I stood by my main workbench, wiping dust off a finished puzzle box. I watched through the large glass garage door as Carter stepped out of the driver's side, wearing a designer suit that cost more than my first car. My father emerged from the passenger side, adjusting his expensive tie, his face set in that familiar mask of absolute authority. My mother followed, holding a designer handbag and looking around the dusty alleyway with undisguised disgust. They walked into my shop as if they already owned it. Well, my father said, his voice booming into the high rafters. His eyes scanned the heavy machinery, the stacks of premium lumber, and the finished orders lined up on the shipping racks. I could see the gears turning in his head, calculating the profit margins. I have to admit, Matthew, you have put together a nice little operation here. It is a business, I said flatly. What do you want, David? My mother gasped softly, clutching her purse. Matthew, do not speak to your father that way. We are here to support you. Carter scoffed, walking over to a stack of freshly cut maple boards. He ran his hand over the wood, leaving a smudge. Support you and save you from yourself, little brother. We heard you are swimming in the deep end now. Talking to major distributors. We heard about the artisan fair. My father interrupted, stepping closer to my workbench. He adopted the tone he used when negotiating hostile takeovers. It is impressive. But running a hobby out of a garage is very different from managing a national supply chain. You are out of your depth, Matthew. You need infrastructure. You need a real lawyer to handle contracts. You need marketing. You need us. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. He slapped them down on my workbench. I have drafted an acquisition agreement, my father stated, tapping the papers with his index finger. My firm will absorb Isaac's Landing. We will handle the promotion, the legalities, and the distribution. We will put you on a very generous salary. You can just stay in the back room and play with your wood. It is a win-win. I looked down at the papers. It was a complete surrender of my rights. He wanted to own my name, my designs, and my son's future. A generous salary, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Just like the generous salary you paid me to do data entry while Carter bought a new sports car every year? Carter bristled. Do not be ungrateful. We are throwing you a lifeline before you screw this up. I am not signing anything, I said, looking right into my father's eyes. I do not want your help. I do not need your lawyers. And I certainly do not want your dirty money. My father's face flushed a deep, angry red. The veins in his neck began to bulge. The polished corporate mask slipped, revealing the tyrant underneath. You arrogant fool, he hissed, stepping so close I could smell his bitter coffee breath. You think because you carved a nice little toy you are suddenly a businessman? You are nothing without this family. If you try to negotiate with these major buyers alone, they will chew you up and spit you out. You are signing this document today, Matthew, or I promise you, I will use every connection I have in this city to blackball your little workshop into bankruptcy. Before I could respond, the heavy steel door of the shop swung open. I highly doubt you have the power to do that, David. The voice was smooth, cultured, and carried the effortless weight of real power. My father froze. Carter spun around. My mother took a step back. Standing in the doorway was Christian Vance. He was flanked by two men in sharp, understated suits. Christian walked into the shop, his eyes locking onto my father. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my father look small. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin looking like old parchment. His jaw actually dropped. Mr. Vance? My father stammered, his booming voice suddenly shrinking into a pathetic croak. He quickly wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers and took a step forward, extending a trembling hand. Christian, what a surprise. What brings you to this part of town? Christian did not take my father's hand. He looked at the extended arm for a long, painful second, then slowly moved his gaze back to my father's face. I am here for a scheduled business meeting, David, Christian said coldly. Though I must admit, I am surprised to find you here, especially considering our conversation last week. Carter looked between them, thoroughly confused. Dad? Do you know him? My father swallowed hard, completely ignoring Carter. He forced a desperate, greasy smile. Yes, well, Matthew is my son. We were just discussing his future. In fact, my firm is stepping in to represent him. We are going to handle the Oak Haven account for him. No, you are not, Christian stated. The finality in his voice was like the slam of a judge's gavel. Christian stepped past my father, treating him like a piece of broken furniture, and stood next to me. He picked up the stack of acquisition papers my father had thrown on the bench. Christian glanced at the top page, scoffed in disgust, and dropped it into the sawdust bin at my feet. Let me make this perfectly clear, David, Christian said, turning back to face my family. Last week, I rejected your firm's proposal because it was entirely devoid of soul. Your marketing strategies are aggressive, but your products are hollow. You produce garbage for a quick profit. Oak Haven does not deal in garbage. My mother let out a small, horrified gasp. Carter just stared, his mouth hanging open. The invisible string holding up his arrogance had suddenly been cut. Furthermore, Christian continued, his voice echoing in the silent shop, I am not here to negotiate with a marketing firm. I am here to offer Matthew a $5 million exclusive distribution contract. And a key stipulation of this contract, which my legal team has already drafted, is that neither you, nor your firm, nor any of your subsidiaries are allowed anywhere near the production, promotion, or profits of Isaac's Landing. The number hung in the air. $5 million. My father literally stumbled backward. He hit the edge of a heavy table saw and had to grip the metal to keep from falling. His eyes were wide, darting from Christian to me. The realization hit him with the force of a speeding truck. He had not just lost the biggest client of his career. He had lost it to the son he had spent a lifetime abusing, humiliating, and trying to break. I had not just survived without his money. I had completely surpassed him in every possible metric. Matthew, my father whispered. It was not a demand. It was a plea. It was the sound of a broken man realizing he had absolutely nothing left to leverage. I looked at the man who had watched my brother smash my son's heart into pieces. I looked at the man who had threatened to put me on the street. I think you should leave now, David, I said. My real partner is here, and we have business to discuss. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Christian turned to me with a respectful nod. Matthew, my legal team and I are going to step into your office to set up the paperwork. We will give you a few minutes to clear out the distractions. Thank you, Christian, I said. Christian and his lawyers walked into the small glass-walled office at the back of the shop, closing the door behind them. The heavy, suffocating silence returned to the main floor. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic outside. My father remained leaning against the table saw. He looked 10 years older than he had when he walked in. The polished, powerful CEO was gone. In his place was just an aging, defeated bully. His empire was crumbling, and the one person who could have saved him was the person he had driven away. Carter was staring at the floor, his face pale. All his life, his worth had been tied to being better than me. Now, standing in a shop smelling of sawdust and success, wearing a suit paid for by our father's failing company, the reality of his own mediocrity was crushing him. He had nothing to say. It was my mother who broke the silence. She rushed forward, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. She reached out to grab my arm. Matthew, please, she cried, her voice cracking. We are family. We did not know. If we had known you were doing this well, we never would have. Never would have what, Mom? I interrupted, stepping back so she could not touch me. You never would have treated me like garbage? You never would have let Carter destroy Isaac's birthday? Is that what it takes to get basic human decency in this family? A $5 million price tag. She covered her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. We love you. We want to be part of your life. We want to see Isaac. You lost that privilege, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I was not yelling. I did not need to yell anymore. You do not get to come back just because I am winning. I looked over at Carter. He finally lifted his head, his eyes avoiding mine. Carter, I said sharply. He flinched. If you ever want to speak to me again, it starts with one thing. You will get on your knees in front of my son, and you will apologize for what you did to him. You will tell him you are a coward and a bully. Until that happens, you do not exist to me. Carter swallowed hard, his throat bobbing, but he gave a slow, barely visible nod. I turned back to my mother. Mom, you have to stop lying. You have to stop pretending that this family is perfect. You have to stop covering up the abuse. If I hear one more excuse from you, I will block your number permanently. Finally, I looked at the man who had caused all of this. David. He slowly pushed himself off the table saw. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a glimmer of respect in his eyes, but it was quickly buried under layers of bruised ego. You think you have one? My father rasped, his voice shaking. You think money fixes everything? No, I replied softly. Money does not fix anything, but it builds a wall high enough to keep you out. If you want to know your grandson, David, you have to learn how to be a grandfather before you try to be a father. You have to prove you care about him, not just his last name. But I am not holding my breath. I pointed toward the heavy steel door. Get out of my shop. My father stared at me for a long time. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the exit. Carter followed closely behind him, his head hung low. My mother lingered for a second, weeping into her hands, before she too turned and followed the men out into the gray afternoon. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. I stood alone in the center of the shop. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The scent of cedar filled my lungs. The invisible weight that had been pressing down on my chest for 32 years was gone. I felt light. I felt powerful. I felt absolute, unshakable peace. 2 years is a long time when you are building a new life. The Oak Haven contract changed everything. Isaac's Landing went from a local secret to a global brand. We expanded the workshop, taking over the entire warehouse building. I hired a team of 20 skilled artisans, and true to my word, I made Elijah my honorary foreman. He walked around the shop with a clipboard, grumbling about young people not respecting the grain, but I saw him smiling more in those 2 years than I had in my entire life. The divorce lawyers and custody battles were a thing of the past. Sarah and I co-parented beautifully. I bought a Real house, a beautiful mid-century modern place with a massive backyard and a dedicated art studio just for Isaac. The college fund was overflowing. My son would never have to worry about the cost of his dreams. Isaac was 13 now. He was growing tall, his shoulders broadening, but his heart remained soft and kind. He spent his weekends in the shop with me, not just watching, but creating. He had a natural eye for design, a patience that I envied. He was happy. He was safe. As for my family, the silence had been profound. True to my boundaries, I had not reached out. My father's firm had survived by the skin of its teeth, heavily downsized and a shell of its former glory. Then, on a crisp autumn evening, Uncle Jonathan came over for dinner. We were sitting on my back patio, watching Isaac sketch the old oak tree in our yard. The fire pit was crackling, casting warm light across the stone. Jonathan took a sip of his coffee and sighed deeply. Your father is getting older, Matthew. The stress has not been kind to him. I kept my eyes on the fire. He made his choices. He did, Jonathan agreed. But there is something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago. It might help you make sense of the madness. I turned to look at him. There is no sense to what he did. There is, Jonathan said softly. It is just buried under a lot of pain. He set his mug down. Did you know that when your father was your age, he was an artist? I let out a short, incredulous laugh. David? The man who only sees numbers? An artist. A brilliant one, Jonathan said, not smiling. He painted with oils. Landscapes mostly. He had a show in a gallery downtown when he was 22. He was accepted into one of the most prestigious fine arts programs in the country. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the image of a young painter with the ruthless tyrant I knew. What happened? Your grandfather happened, Jonathan said, a shadow crossing his face. After your grandfather's funeral. No, it started before that. When your grandfather found out David wanted to be an artist, he threatened to cut him off entirely. He told David that art was for the weak. He demanded David go to business school and take over the firm, or he would lose his inheritance. He would lose his family. The word inheritance hung in the air. David fought him for a year, Jonathan continued. But eventually the fear won. He broke. He packed up all his canvases, his brushes, and he threw them into a dumpster. He put on a suit, went to business school, and became the exact monster his father wanted him to be. I sat in stunned silence. The puzzle pieces suddenly shifted, locking into a tragic, horrifying picture. When you were born, Jonathan said gently, and you started showing that same artistic spark, that same passion for creating, it terrified him, and then it angered him. Every time he looked at you working in that garage, he saw the ghost of his own cowardice. He hated you for having the courage to do what he was too afraid to do. He tried to crush your spirit so he would not have to face his own regret. The resentment I had carried for years suddenly felt incredibly heavy and strangely fragile. I did not forgive him. Knowing why a snake bites you does not take the venom out of your veins. He still allowed my son to be traumatized. He still abused me, but the white-hot anger dissolved into a profound, hollow pity. David was not just a villain. He was a victim of generational trauma, passing his disease down to the next in line. I broke the cycle, I whispered, watching Isaac happily shading his drawing. Yes, you did, Jonathan smiled. 2 weeks later, we hosted a birthday party for Isaac at the house. It was a lively, noisy affair filled with his friends, pizza, and laughter. As I was carrying a stack of presents into the living room, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Carter standing on the porch. He was alone. He did not arrive in a Porsche. He had parked a sensible sedan on the street. He looked thinner, the expensive arrogance completely washed away from his face. He looked nervous. "Matthew," he said quietly. I stepped outside, pulling the door partially closed behind me. "Carter." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box and a handwritten letter. He did not try to hand them to me. "I know I am not invited," Carter said, his voice trembling slightly. "I do not expect to come in, but I wrote this letter for Isaac, and I bought him this." He opened the box to reveal a high-quality, beginner's wood carving set. "I wanted him to know that I was wrong, that I am so sorry I broke his fortress, and that I know he is a builder." I looked at my older brother. For the first time, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. He had hit his own rock bottom and he was finally trying to climb out. "Wait here," I said. I went inside and found Isaac. I told him his Uncle Carter was outside with a letter and a gift. I told him he did not have to go out there if he did not want to. Isaac looked at me, then set his sketchbook down. "It's okay, Dad." I watched from the doorway as my 13-year-old son walked out onto the porch. Carter immediately dropped down to one knee. I could not hear all the words, but I saw Carter talking fast, wiping tears from his eyes. I saw him hand Isaac the box and the letter. Isaac listened. He did not smile, but he did not pull away either. When Carter finished, Isaac nodded slowly. He accepted the gift, reached out, and awkwardly patted Carter on the shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it was monumental. It was the beginning of healing. That evening, after the party was over and the house was quiet, I went out to the front gate to lock up. Sitting on the brick pillar next to the mailbox was a large, flat package wrapped in plain brown paper. There was no name tag, no return address. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen island. Isaac came out of his room, drawn by the rustling paper. We carefully unwrapped it together. Inside was a vintage, beautifully preserved mahogany art easel. Next to it was a heavy wooden case containing dozens of tubes of professional-grade oil paints, pure bristle brushes, and a blank, pristine canvas. I recognized the brand of the paints. They were the exact kind my Uncle Jonathan said my father used to use before he threw his dreams into a dumpster. I looked up at Isaac. His eyes were wide with awe as he ran his fingers over the smooth wood of the easel. There was no note. There was no demand for an apology or an invitation. Just a quiet, anonymous surrender. It was my father, standing in the shadows of his own regret, taking the one thing he loved most in the world and passing it safely to his grandson. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from him. And for the first time, it was enough. I looked at the easel, and then I looked at my son. The toxic chain of our family had been wrapped around our necks for generations. But right here, in this house built on sawdust and resilience, the chain finally snapped. We were free. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It was a long journey, but sharing it makes the scars feel a little lighter. I hope this resonated with you in some way, maybe reminding you that your worth is not defined by the people who cannot see it. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, having to break a toxic cycle in your own family? It can be a very lonely road, and I would be honored to read your experiences in the comments. Before you go, I have a special request for the 1% Club. If you are part of the amazing group of people who stayed with me until the very end, please drop a W in the comments below. The W stands for winner, because anyone who has the strength to walk away from toxicity and build their own peace is a true winner in my book. Thank you again for your incredible support. Please do not forget to like this video and follow the channel so we can share more stories together. Take care of yourselves and keep building.